They never called her by name in front of witnesses. It wasn't cruelty exactly. Not the kind that leaves bruises or draws blood in public. It was something colder, more efficient, the kind of exclusion that doesn't need to announce itself because everyone already knows. Svana had been marked at 7 winters old, not with ink or blade, but with silence. She didn't remember what she'd done to earn it. Maybe nothing. Maybe her mother had angered someone. Maybe she'd been born under the wrong moon. The elders never explained, and no one asked. In the clan, you didn't question marks. You simply understood them. The mark meant she ate last. It meant she slept near the door, where the cold came in. It meant that when the clan needed someone to carry the blood bucket after a hunt, or to scrub the stones after a funeral, or to walk into the forest alone to retrieve something the hunters had left behind, they would look at her, and she would go. Not because she was brave, because refusal wasn't a concept that applied to her. The forest surrounding the clan's settlement was older than memory. The trees grew so thick that even at midday, the light never touched the ground. The bogs shifted without wind. The elders said the forest had a will of its own, that it remembered things the clans had long forgotten. Svana had been sent into it more times than she could count. She'd learned not to look too long at the shadows between the roots, not to listen when the wind sounded like breathing, not to wonder why certain paths appeared only when she walked them alone. The clan called it survival. She called it nothing at all. Tonight, the settlement was gathered around the ritual fire. The flames crackled in the center of the stone circle, casting long, jittering shadows against the timber walls. The air smelled of pine resin and sweat. Drums pounded in low, uneven rhythm. The elders stood in a half circle, their faces painted with ash and ochre, their voices rising and falling in a language Svana didn't fully understand. She knelt at the edge of the circle, as she always did, invisible. The ritual was meant to renew the clan's bond with the forest, to ensure another year of safe passage, good hunts, healthy births. It required offerings, blood, bone, and someone to carry the offerings into the trees. Svana already knew it would be her. The eldest, a woman named Thyra, turned slowly. Her eyes were pale, almost colorless. She didn't look at Svana directly. She never did. But her hand lifted, one finger extended. The gesture was enough. Svana rose without sound. A younger man, broad-shouldered and grim-faced, handed her a woven sack. It was heavy, wet. She didn't look inside. She'd learned not to. "Take it to the old elm," Thyra said. Her voice was flat, ceremonial. "Leave it at the roots. Do not wait. Do not look back." Svana nodded. No one wished her well. No one ever did. Before we begin this journey into one of the forgotten North's darkest and most emotional stories of fate and memory, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. And if this is your first time on our channel, subscribe now. Because what you're about to hear is a story that legends tried to hide, but memory refused to forget. Her POV continued. The forest swallowed her whole the moment she stepped past the torchlight. The air changed, cooler, heavier. The drumbeat faded into nothing, replaced by the faint rustle of leaves and the distant croak of something unseen. Svana walked without hesitation. She knew the way to the old elm. She'd been there before, twice, maybe 3 times. The tree was ancient, its trunk split down the middle by lightning, its roots tangled into the black water of a nearby bog. The path was narrow, overgrown with ferns and moss. The ground squelched beneath her feet. She didn't carry a torch. The clan never gave her one. But tonight, the forest felt different. The silence was too perfect, too still. Svana paused, her breath misting in the cold air. She turned her head slowly, scanning the shadows. Nothing moved, but she felt it. The weight of something watching. Not hostile, not curious, just present. Her fingers tightened on the sack. She forced herself forward. The elm loomed ahead, its blackened trunk gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Svana knelt at its base, set the sack down carefully, and pulled the edges open. Inside, the bones of a stillborn calf, wrapped in wool soaked with blood. She placed them at the roots, as instructed. Then she stood. Do not wait. Do not look back. But as she turned to leave, she saw it. A shape, tall, thin, standing just beyond the tree line, not moving, not breathing, just there. Svana's heart lurched. She should have run, but her legs wouldn't move. The shape didn't approach. It didn't speak. It simply stood, half shrouded in shadow, its outline wrong somehow. Too still, too sharp, too aware. And then slowly, it tilted its head. As if recognizing her, Svana turned and walked. Not ran. Walked. Because running would mean she'd seen something. And seeing something would mean she'd have to tell the clan. And telling the clan would mean they'd send her back. Alone. Again. Cliffhanger. What followed her out of the forest that night wasn't the wind. Her pauvi. She didn't sleep. Svana lay on her pallet near the door, staring at the rough timber ceiling, listening to the breath of the clan around her. Slow. Even. Undisturbed. No one had asked if the offering had been accepted. No one ever did. The ritual had ended hours ago. The fire had been doused. The elders had retreated into their longhouse. The drums had gone silent. And Svana had returned. Alone. She hadn't told anyone what she'd seen. What would she even say? I saw a shape in the forest. It looked at me. It didn't move. They'd call her mad. Or worse, they'd call her marked again, touched by something the forest had rejected, and then they'd decide she wasn't worth keeping. So she said nothing. But the memory sat heavy in her chest. That shape, that tilt of the head, it had known her. The next morning, the settlement woke as it always did. Fires rekindled, voices low and purposeful. The hunters gathered their spears. The women prepared the day's bread. The children were sent to fetch water from the stream. Svana rose before anyone could call for her. She pulled on her worn cloak, tied her hair back with a strip of leather, and stepped outside into the cold. The sky was gray, heavy with unshed snow. The air smelled like wet earth and smoke. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Svana's eyes drifted toward the tree line. The forest stood as it always had, dense, dark, impenetrable. But now, she couldn't shake the sense that something was looking back. His POV. He had no name anymore. Names were for those who still belonged to the world of fire and flesh. He had left that world long ago. Or perhaps it had left him. He couldn't remember which. What he did remember was the cold. The endless cold that came with forgetting. The way the forest had slowly erased him, piece by piece, until all that remained was will and hunger. Not for blood, not for meat, but for meaning, for purpose, for witness. He had walked the forest for so long that the trees had begun to grow through him. The moss had claimed his edges. The fog had learned to mimic his shape. He was not alive, but he was not gone. He simply was. And then, last night, he had seen her, the girl with the sack, the one the clan sent into the dark. She had knelt at the old elm, placed the bones, and stood. And for the first time in years, perhaps centuries, he had felt something stir, not pity, not anger, but recognition. She was like him, forgotten, erased, sent into the dark and expected not to return. But she had, and so he followed, not to harm, not to save, but to see what would happen. Her POV. 3 days passed. Svana worked without complaint. She hauled water, she scrubbed stones, she carried firewood, she mended torn cloth. No one spoke to her. No one ever did. But she noticed things. Small things. The way the hunters returned earlier than usual, their faces tight and uneasy. The way the elders gathered more often, their voices hushed and urgent. The way the children no longer played near the tree line. Something had changed, and the clan felt it. On the 4th night, Thyra summoned her. Her POV continued. The elders' longhouse was dim, lit only by a single oil lamp. Thyra sat on a low stool, her pale eyes fixed on the flame. Svana entered and knelt. "The forest is restless," Thyra said quietly. Svana said nothing. The hunters found tracks. Not wolf, not bear, something else. Svana's pulse quickened. They end at the settlement's edge, at the eastern gate, the gate nearest Svana's pallet. Thyra's gaze shifted, not to Svana's face, never to her face, but close enough. "You were the last to enter the forest." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Svana said. "Did you see anything?" Svana hesitated. The truth sat heavy on her tongue, but she swallowed it. "No." Thyra studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Go." Svana rose and left, but as she stepped into the cold night air, she felt it again, the weight of being watched. She turned slowly, and there, just beyond the firelight, at the edge of the settlement, it stood, tall, still, waiting. Cliffhanger. It had crossed the threshold. Her POV. It didn't move. Svana stood frozen at the threshold of the elders' longhouse, her breath misting in the cold air, her eyes locked on the shape at the settlement's edge. It was clearer now than it had been in the forest, taller than any man, its limbs too long, its posture too rigid. It wore no furs, no cloth, Its surface seemed to ripple faintly like water disturbed by wind, but it wasn't water. It was something else, something that had learned to hold a shape. Svana's heart pounded. She should scream. She should run. She should call for the hunters. But she didn't, because the shape wasn't looking at the settlement. It was looking at her, and in that gaze, if it could be called a gaze, there was no malice, only recognition. She took one step forward, then another. The settlement was quiet. Most of the clan had retreated into their homes for the night. The fires had burned low. The only sound was the faint creak of timber and the distant rustle of wind through the trees. Svana walked slowly toward the edge of the torchlight. The shape didn't retreat. It didn't advance. It simply waited. When she was close enough to see the faint texture of its surface, like bark, like shadow, like smoke, it tilted its head, the same gesture it had made in the forest. Svana's voice came out hoarse. "What do you want?" It didn't answer. It couldn't. But it shifted slightly, turning its head toward the forest. An invitation. Or a warning. Svana didn't know which. His POV. She was braver than the others. Or perhaps more broken. He couldn't tell the difference anymore. But she had come closer than anyone had in a very long time. The others, the ones with fire and iron and voices full of certainty, they never approached. They shouted. They burned sage. They painted symbols on stones and drove stakes into the ground. But they never looked. She did. And so he stayed. Not to claim her, not to consume her, but because she was the first thing in centuries that had felt real. Her POV Svana didn't follow it into the forest. Not that night. But she didn't run either. She stood at the edge of the settlement until the shape finally turned and melted back into the trees, its form dissolving into shadow and mist. When it was gone, she exhaled shakily and returned to her pallet. She didn't sleep. The next morning, the clan gathered, not for a ritual, for a meeting. Thyra stood at the center of the stone circle, flanked by the other elders. The hunters formed a loose ring around them. The rest of the clan filled in the gaps. Svana stood at the back, as always. Thyra's voice carried across the clearing. "The forest has sent a sign." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "The tracks have been found again. Closer this time. At the eastern gate." More murmurs. Nervous glances. "We believe the ritual was incomplete. The offering was not enough." Svana's stomach tightened. Thyra's pale eyes swept the crowd. "We must send another." Silence. Then, slowly, every gaze turned toward Svana. Not with anger. Not with pity, with inevitability. Her POV continued. They didn't ask her. They simply decided. By midday, the second offering had been prepared. This time, it wasn't bones. It was a living thing. A lamb, white and trembling, its legs bound with cord. And Svana was to carry it, deeper than before, to a place she had never been. To a grove the elders called the Hollow. "Leave the lamb at the center stone," Thyra instructed. "Do not linger. Do not speak. The forest will decide if the debt is paid." Svana nodded. No one met her eyes. No one wished her safe passage. She took the lamb and walked into the trees. Her POV continued. The hollow was deeper than the old elm. The path was barely visible, overgrown with thorns and creeping vines. The air grew colder the further she went. The light dimmed until even midday felt like dusk. The lamb bleated softly in her arms. Svana held it closer. She didn't know why. It didn't matter. The grove appeared without warning. A clearing ringed by ancient stones, half buried in moss. At the center stood a single flat rock, stained dark with old blood. Svana knelt and placed the lamb on the stone. It struggled weakly, its eyes wide and glossy. She untied its legs. It didn't run. It simply lay there, trembling. Svana stood and stepped back. "Do not linger. Do not speak." But as she turned to leave, she felt it. The presence, closer than before. She stopped, and slowly, she turned her head. The shape stood at the edge of the clearing, not hiding, not watching from a distance, standing in full view. And for the first time she saw it clearly. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, jointed in places they shouldn't be. Its surface shimmered faintly, like wet stone. Its face, if it had one, was smooth, featureless, except for the eyes. Two deep hollows where eyes should have been. And in those hollows, something ancient looked back at her. Svana's breath caught. "You've been following me," she whispered. The shape didn't move, but the air around it seemed to shift. And in that shift, she felt something. Not words, but meaning. Yes, cliffhanger. The lamb stopped trembling, and the forest went silent. Her POV. The silence was absolute. No wind, no birdsong, no rustle of leaves. Even the lamb had gone still. Svanna stood in the center of the hollow, her pulse loud in her ears, her eyes locked on the shape at the clearing's edge. It didn't move, but she could feel it waiting, not for her to run, for her to choose. She didn't understand how she knew that, but she did. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "What are you?" The shape tilted its head again, that same slow, deliberate motion. The air rippled, and this time, she felt it more clearly. Not words, not sound, but impression. Forgotten. Witness. Older than name. Svanna's throat tightened. "Why are you following me?" Another ripple. "Because you are like me. Erased. Still here." Her breath hitched. She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't, because it was true. The clan had erased her long ago, not with violence, with silence, with invisibility, with the slow, methodical removal of her presence from every part of their world. And yet, she was still here, still breathing, still walking, still real, even if no one else saw it. The shape took one step forward. Svanna flinched but didn't retreat. It stopped, and then slowly, it extended one long, jointless arm toward the lamb. The lamb's eyes rolled back. Its body went limp, but it didn't bleed. It simply stopped. Svanna's stomach turned. "You killed it." The ripple came again. No, released. She didn't understand. But before she could ask, the shape turned its hollow gaze back to her, and she felt the weight of a question, not spoken, but clear. "Will you go back? To the ones who sent you here to die?" Svanna's chest tightened. "I don't have anywhere else to go." The shape was still for a long moment. Then it turned, and began to walk deeper into the forest. It paused after a few steps, looked back, waiting. Svanna stared at it, at the clan behind her, at the path she'd walked 100 times, carrying offerings she didn't understand, into a forest that had swallowed so many before her, and for the first time in her life, she made a choice that wasn't obedience. She followed. His POV. She was the first to follow willingly. The others, those who had stumbled into the hollow before her, had screamed, had begged, had tried to bargain with gods they no longer believed in. But she simply walked, step by step, into the dark. He didn't know why it mattered, but it did. Her POV, days later, Svanna lost track of time. The forest was different here, deeper, older. The trees grew so close together that their trunks fused into walls of bark. The ground was soft with centuries of decay. The air smelled like wet stone and forgotten things. The shape walked ahead of her, always visible, never hurrying. It didn't speak, but it guided. When she stumbled, it stopped. When she needed water, it led her to a spring. When exhaustion finally pulled her down, it waited while she slept. And when she woke, it was still there, watching. On the 3rd day, or perhaps the 5th, she couldn't tell, they reached a place she had never seen. A canyon, narrow and deep, its walls slick with moss and dripping water. At the bottom, half buried in shadow, was a structure, not a building, not a ruin, something older, carved directly into the stone. The shape descended without hesitation. Svanna followed. Inside, the air was cold and still. The walls were covered in symbols, carved deep, worn smooth by time. Some she recognized from the clan's rituals, others were completely foreign. The shape stopped at the center of the chamber, and for the first time, it spoke, not with a voice, but with presence. The air itself seemed to vibrate with meaning. "This is where I was made, where I was forgotten, where I chose to remain." Svanna stared at the symbols. "What were you?" "I was a guardian. I was a punishment. I was a promise. I was all of these, until I was none." She turned to face it. And now, the hollow eyes regarded her. "Now I am only witness to what the forest remembers and what the clans forget." Svanna's voice dropped to a whisper. "Why did you bring me here?" The shape was silent for a long moment. Then it moved. It reached out, not toward her, but toward the wall, and where its hand touched the stone, the symbols began to glow, faintly, like embers. And in that light, Svanna saw names, hundreds of them, carved into the stone, names of those who had been sent into the forest, marked, forgotten, erased, and at the very bottom, still blank, still waiting, her own space, cliffhanger. The shape turned to her. "You do not have to let them carve it." Her POV. Svanna stood before the glowing wall, her breath shallow, her hands trembling. The names stretched across the stone in endless rows, some carved deep, others barely visible, worn by time and moisture, each one a life, each one erased. She reached out slowly, her fingertips brushing the surface. The stone was cold, but the symbols pulsed faintly beneath her touch, as if they still held some fragment of warmth, some memory of the people who had once carried them. They were all like me, she whispered. The shape stood beside her, silent and still. Yes, sent here to die, or to be forgotten. Which is slower? Svana's throat tightened. She pulled her hand back and turned to face the shape. Why did you show me this? The hollow eyes regarded her. Because you are the first to ask, the first to follow, the first to see me as something other than death. Svana's voice cracked. I don't even know what you are. Neither do I. Not anymore. The shape moved, not toward her, but toward the far end of the chamber, where the stone curved inward and the symbols grew more dense. It stopped before a single carved figure, larger than the rest, older, a shape that looked almost human, almost wolf, almost neither. This was what I was made to be, before the clans forgot why. Svana stepped closer. A guardian, a witness, to oaths, to betrayals, to those the clans deemed unworthy. It turned its hollow gaze back to her. I was meant to consume them, to erase them so the forest could remain pure. Svana's heart clenched. But you didn't. The shape was silent. Then slowly it shook its head. I refused. And so I became what they feared most. Something that remembers. Her POV continued. The shape led her deeper into the chamber. At the very back, hidden behind a curtain of roots and dripping water, was a pool, dark, still, its surface like black glass. The shape stopped at its edge. This is where I wait, where I watch, where I listen to the forest breathe. Svana knelt beside it. Her reflection stared back at her. Pale, thin, hollow-eyed. She barely recognized herself. What happens now? She asked quietly. The shape didn't answer immediately. When it did, the meaning was heavy. You choose. You can return. Tell them you survived. Let them carve your name. Or, Svana looked up, you can stay and become what I am. A witness. A reminder. Something they cannot erase. Her pulse quickened. If I stay, I'll never be human again. You were never allowed to be. The words hit her like a stone. Because they were true. The clan had never seen her as human. Only as function. As tool. As mistake. She stared at her reflection. And slowly, she reached out and touched the water. The surface rippled. And in the ripple, she saw something else. Not her face, but theirs. The clan. Gathered around the fire. Moving on. Forgetting. Already carving her name. Cliffhanger. Svana pulled her hand from the water. I'm not ready to be forgotten yet. Her POV. Svana didn't return to the settlement. Not yet. Instead, she stayed. In the stone chamber. In the silence. In the company of something that had no name and no face, but understood her more clearly than anyone ever had. The shape didn't demand anything of her. It simply existed. And in its existence, she found something she had never known before. Space. To breathe. To think. To be. Days passed. Or perhaps weeks. Time moved differently in the deep forest. The shape taught her things without speaking. How to move through the trees without sound. How to find water by following the moss. How to read the carvings on the stones. Symbols that told stories of the clans before they became clans. When they were simply people. Afraid. Desperate. Willing to bargain with anything that promised survival. And she learned what the shape had been. Not a god. Not a demon. But a contract. Made long ago, when the first settlers came to the forest and found it unwilling to yield, they had offered it a bargain. We will give you the ones we do not need, and you will let the rest of us live. The forest had accepted, and the shape had been born from that acceptance, a thing to carry the weight of their cruelty, a thing to consume the ones they marked, a thing to let them sleep at night, believing they had done what was necessary. But the shape had grown tired of eating the forgotten, of being the instrument of their cowardice. And so, one day, it had stopped. It had refused, and the clans had called it a curse. His POV. She was changing. Not in body, not yet, but in presence. The way she moved, the way she listened, the way she looked at the symbols on the stone with understanding instead of fear. She was becoming something the clans could no longer use, and he found that deeply satisfying. Her POV. On the 9th day, or perhaps the 12th, Svana woke to find the shape standing at the entrance to the chamber. Motionless. Waiting. She rose slowly. What is it? The shape turned its hollow gaze toward the surface. They are looking for you. Svana's stomach tightened. Why? Because the forest has gone quiet, and they believe you are the cause. She stared at it. Am I? The shape tilted its head. You are the first offering to refuse, the first to walk with me instead of from me. The forest does not know what to do with that. Savannah's pulse quickened. What will they do if they find me? The shape was silent. Then it moved, one long arm extending toward the pool. The surface rippled without touch, and in the ripple, Svanna saw them, the hunters, moving through the forest in a tight formation, spears drawn, faces grim, led by Thyra. They were close, too close. Her POV continued. I have to go back, Svanna said quietly. The shape turned to her. Why? Because if I don't, they'll burn the forest. Let them try. People will die. They have already sent you to die. Why do you care if they follow? Svanna's jaw tightened. Because I'm not like them. The shape was still for a long moment. Then it moved closer, and for the first time, it touched her. Not with force, not with violence, but with something that felt almost like sorrow. Then you are stronger than I was. It pulled back. If you return, they will not forgive you. They will not see you as survivor. They will see you as proof that they were wrong. Svanna met its hollow gaze. Good. Her POV continued. She walked out of the chamber alone. The shape did not follow, but as she climbed the canyon wall and stepped back into the forest, she felt it, not behind her, but with her, in her breath, in her step, in the way the trees seemed to part just slightly as she moved. She was no longer invisible. The forest saw her now, and it remembered. Her POV continued. The hunters found her at the edge of the hollow, standing in the center of the clearing, her hands empty, her face calm. They stopped, spears raised. Thyra stepped forward, her pale eyes narrowed. You were sent to die. Svanna met her gaze without flinching. I know, and yet you return. I do. Thyra's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty. The forest should have taken you. It did, Svanna said quietly, and then it let me go. The hunters exchanged uneasy glances. Thyra took another step forward. What did you see? Svanna smiled faintly. Everything you tried to forget. Cliffhanger. The wind shifted, and behind Svanna, the shape stepped into view. Her POV. The hunters recoiled. Spears lifted higher. Breaths quickened. Eyes widened. But no one moved. The shape stood behind Svanna, tall and still, its hollow gaze fixed on Thyra. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its presence was enough. Thyra's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. What is that? Svanna turned slightly, glancing back at the shape. It didn't move. She looked at Thyra again. It's what you made. We made nothing, Thyra said sharply. You made a bargain, Svanna replied. A long time ago, you offered the forest your unwanted, your marked, your mistakes, and the forest accepted. She gestured toward the shape. This is what carried that weight, until it decided not to anymore. Thyra's jaw tightened. You're lying. Am I? Svanna took a slow step forward. The hunters tensed, but none dared move closer. You sent me into the forest to die, Svanna continued, her voice calm. You've sent dozens before me, maybe hundreds, and every time you told yourselves it was necessary, that the forest demanded it, that it kept the clan safe. She stopped just a few paces from Thyra. But the forest never demanded anything. You did, because it was easier to send us away than to admit you were wrong. Thyra's eyes flashed. You were marked. The signs were clear. What signs? Svanna asked quietly. That I was born under a waning moon? That my mother died in childbirth? That I didn't cry loud enough as an infant? Silence. You marked me because you needed someone to carry your guilt. And when I survived, you sent me again. And again. Until you decided I wasn't even worth killing. Just discarding. Thyra's hand tightened on her staff. The elders decided wrong. The words hung in the air like smoke. Svanna felt the shape shift behind her, not threateningly, but present, solid, real. Thyra's gaze flicked to it, then back to Svanna. If you've come back to curse us, I haven't, Svanna said. I've come back to show you what you've been running from. She turned and gestured toward the shape. This is your witness. It has watched every offering, remembered every name, and it has decided that you will not forget anymore. Thyra's voice dropped. What does that mean? Svanna met her gaze. It means the forest is done accepting your sacrifices. His POV. He had not expected this. For her to return, for her to speak, for her to stand before the ones who had erased her and refused to be erased again. She was not like the others. She was not vengeful. She was not broken. She was something else, something he had not seen in centuries. Whole. Her POV. The hunters began to murmur among themselves. Thyra raised a hand for silence. You cannot speak for the forest. I'm not, Svana said. It is. She nodded toward the shape. Thyra's eyes narrowed. Then let it speak. The shape didn't move, but the air around it began to shift. Subtle at first, then stronger. A vibration. A hum. A presence that pressed against the edges of perception. And in that presence, words formed. Not spoken. Felt. No more. The hunters staggered back. Thyra's face went rigid. No more offerings. No more marks. No more forgetting. The shape stepped forward. The ground beneath it seemed to ripple, as if the earth itself recognized what it was. I was made to carry your shame. I will no longer do so. If you send another into the forest to die, I will return them, and I will follow them home. Silence. Absolute. Thyra's voice came out hoarse. And if we refuse? The shape tilted its head. Then you will learn what it means to be forgotten. Her POV continued. The hunters broke. Not all at once, but slowly. One by one they lowered their spears, turned their backs, walked away. Thyra remained, her pale eyes locked on Svana. You have destroyed us. Svana shook her head. No, I've freed you. From what? From the lie that you were ever safe. Thyra's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes, something small and fragile, cracked. She turned and followed the hunters back toward the settlement. Svana watched her go. Then she felt the shape beside her, not touching, just there. Thank you, she whispered. The shape didn't respond, but she felt its meaning. You did this, not me. Cliffhanger. Svana turned toward the settlement, and for the first time, she walked toward it not as the marked, but as the witness. Her POV. Svana didn't enter the settlement immediately. She stood at the tree line, watching the smoke rise from the longhouses, listening to the faint sounds of movement and voices. The shape stood beside her, silent, patient. They won't accept this, she said quietly. The shape's hollow gaze turned toward her. They don't have to accept it. They only have to stop. Svana exhaled slowly. And if they don't, then they will face what I have become, a memory they cannot bury. She glanced at it. Will you hurt them? The shape was still for a long moment. No, I will simply remain, until they remember what they have done. Svana nodded. She understood. The shape wasn't a weapon. It was a mirror. Her POV continued. She walked into the settlement just after dusk. The fires had been lit. The clan was gathered for the evening meal. Conversation stopped as she appeared. Faces turned. Eyes widened. No one spoke. Svana walked slowly through the center of the settlement, her footsteps deliberate, her gaze steady. The shape did not follow her inside, but she felt it. At the threshold, waiting. She stopped at the edge of the stone circle. Thyra stood near the fire, flanked by the other elders. Their expressions were unreadable. Svana spoke first. I'm not here to threaten you. Thyra's voice was cold. Then why are you here? Because I have nowhere else to go, Svana said simply. This is my home, even if you never wanted it to be. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Thyra stepped forward. You brought that thing here. I brought a witness, Svana corrected. Something that has seen every mistake you've made, and it will not let you forget anymore. We did what was necessary. You did what was easy, Svana interrupted. You marked people because it was easier than accepting them. You sent them into the forest because it was easier than changing. And you called it tradition because it was easier than calling it cruelty. Thyra's jaw tightened. You speak as if you are better than us. I'm not, Svana said quietly, but I'm no longer willing to carry your guilt. She turned to address the entire clan. I survived, and I will keep surviving. And every time you look at me, you will remember that the forest didn't take me. You tried to give me away, and I came back. Silence. Then, from the back of the crowd, a voice, quiet, uncertain. What do we do now? Svana turned toward the speaker, a young woman, perhaps a few years older than herself, unmarked, but afraid. Svana's expression softened. You stop marking people. You stop sending them away. And you start asking why you ever thought you needed to. Elder POV, Thyra. Thyra watched the girl, no, the woman, stand before the clan with a calm she had never possessed before. It unsettled her, not because Svana was defiant, but because she was right. The markings had always been arbitrary. A waning moon, a difficult birth, a child who cried too much, or not enough, signs that meant nothing, except to those who needed someone to blame. Thyra had known this. She had always known. But admitting it would mean admitting that every name carved into that stone, every life sent into the forest, had been for nothing. And that was a weight she didn't know how to carry. So she had built walls, rituals, traditions, rules, anything to keep the doubt at bay. But now, standing before this girl who refused to disappear, those walls felt thin, fragile, ready to collapse. Her POV. Svana didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked toward the eastern edge of the settlement, the place where her pallet had been. It was still there, untouched, as if they had expected her to return, or perhaps they had simply forgotten to remove it. She knelt and began to gather her few belongings: a worn blanket, a wooden cup, a strip of leather she used to tie her hair. Not much, but hers. Behind her she heard footsteps. She turned. A small group had followed her. Not the elders, not the hunters, but the others. The ones who had been marked and unmarked. The ones who had watched offerings leave and never return. The ones who had wondered in silence if they would be next. A boy, no older than 10, stepped forward. "Is it true?" he asked quietly, "that the forest doesn't want us anymore?" Svana crouched to meet his eyes. "The forest never wanted you," she said gently. "The clan did, and now they don't have an excuse." The boy stared at her. Then slowly he nodded. Another voice, older, female. "Will it come for us? That thing in the trees?" Svana glanced toward the tree line. The shape was still there, barely visible in the shadows, but present. "Only if you're sent," she said. "And I don't think anyone will be. Not anymore." Cliffhanger. A scream shattered the silence, from the western edge of the settlement, and the shape turned its hollow gaze toward the sound. Her POV. Svana ran. So did half the clan. The scream had come from the western gate, the edge of the settlement that bordered the oldest part of the forest, where the trees grew so thick that even hunters rarely ventured. When she arrived, a small crowd had already gathered. At the center stood a man, one of the younger hunters, his face pale, his hands shaking. Before him, on the ground, lay a body, not dead, but still. A woman, older, gray-haired, one of the elders. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing, her mouth slack. Thyra pushed through the crowd and knelt beside her. "Yrsa," she said sharply. "Yrsa, wake up." No response. Thyra pressed her fingers to the woman's throat. A pulse, faint, steady, but she wasn't conscious. She wasn't there. Thyra's gaze snapped to the hunter. "What happened?" The man stammered. I don't know. I was passing by and I saw her standing here, just staring into the trees. I called her name and she didn't respond. And then she just fell." Thyra's eyes narrowed. "Did you see anything else?" The man hesitated, then nodded. There was something. In the trees. Watching. The crowd murmured. Thyra's jaw tightened. She stood and turned toward the forest, toward the shape. It stood just beyond the tree line, motionless, its hollow gaze fixed on the fallen elder. Thyra's voice was ice. "You did this." The shape didn't respond. Svana stepped forward. "It didn't." Thyra whirled on her. "You brought it here. It didn't touch her," Svana said firmly. "Look at her. No marks, no wounds. Whatever happened, it wasn't physical." Thyra stared at her, then back at Yrsa. Svana knelt beside the elder, studying her face. Her eyes were open. Yes, but they weren't empty. They were elsewhere. Svana had seen that look before, in the stone chamber, in the pool. "She's not hurt," Svana said quietly. "She's remembering." His POV. He had not touched her, but he had shown her. The elder had stood at the edge of the settlement, staring into the forest, and he had felt her presence, not with curiosity, but with guilt, old, heavy, buried. And so he had done what he always did. He had reflected it back, not as punishment, but as truth. She had seen the names, the ones she had helped carve, the ones she had helped forget, and now she was trapped in that memory, unable to look away. He did not know if she would wake, but he did not regret it. Her POV. Yrsa woke 3 hours later. She gasped, her body jerking upright, her eyes wide and wild. Thyra was at her side immediately. "Yrsa, what did you see?" The elder's breath came in ragged bursts. Her hands trembled. "The names," she whispered. "I saw the names." Thyra's expression tightened. "What names?" "All of them." Yrsa's voice cracked. "Every child, every offering, every mistake we made." She turned her gaze to Thyra. "We were wrong." Thyra's face went pale. "You're in shock." "We were wrong." Yrsa repeated, louder now. We marked them for nothing. We sent them to die for nothing. And we told ourselves it was the will of the forest because we were too afraid to admit we were just afraid. Silence. Absolute. Yrsa's eyes filled with tears. I saw their faces. I heard their voices. And I felt what they felt when we sent them away. She looked at Svanna. You should have been one of them. And you survived. Not because the forest spared you, but because you were stronger than we ever gave you credit for. Svanna said nothing. Yrsa reached out, her hand shaking, and took Svanna's. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air. Svanna stared at her. Then, slowly, she nodded. I know. Her POV continued. The clan didn't sleep that night. They gathered around the fires, speaking in low, urgent voices. Some demanded the shape be driven away. Others argued that it had only shown the truth. Still others sat in silence, their faces drawn, their eyes distant. Thyra stood at the center of it all, her expression unreadable. Finally, she raised her hand. The voices stilled. We cannot undo what has been done, she said quietly, but we can stop doing it. Murmurs of agreement, of resistance, of uncertainty. Thyra's gaze swept the crowd. No more markings, no more offerings, no more sending our people into the forest to die. A voice from the crowd, sharp, defiant. And what if the forest retaliates? Thyra turned toward the speaker. Then we face it, together, not by sending the weakest among us to bear the cost. Silence. Then slowly, one by one, the clan began to nod. Her POV continued. Svanna stood at the edge of the gathering, watching. The shape stood beside her, still, silent. They're changing, she said quietly. The shape's hollow gaze turned toward her. For now, you don't trust them. I have seen this before. Guilt fades, memory softens, and the cycle begins again. Svanna looked at it. Then we stay, and we remind them. The shape tilted its head. We? Svanna nodded. I'm not leaving, and neither are you. The shape was silent. Then faintly she felt it. Something that might have been approval, or perhaps just acknowledgement. Very well. Cliffhanger. The forest began to hum, and deep in the hollow, the names on the stone began to glow. Her POV, 3 seasons later. The settlement had changed, not all at once, not easily, but slowly, steadily. The markings had stopped. No child was sent into the forest. No one was cast out for being different. The elders, what remained of them, had carved a new stone at the center of the settlement, not for offerings, but for memory. On it, they inscribed the names of those who had been sent away, all of them, as many as they could remember. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was a start. Svanna still lived at the edge of the settlement, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Her pallet had been replaced with a small dwelling, modest, but hers. The clan had offered more. She had refused. She didn't need much, just space, and the knowledge that she could leave if she wanted to, that she chose to stay. The shape no longer stood at the tree line every night, but it was never far. Svanna would see it sometimes, moving through the forest, its tall form barely visible among the trees. The clan had learned to live with it. Some feared it. Some respected it. Most simply accepted it. It was part of the forest now, and the forest was part of them. His POV. She had changed him, not in form, but in purpose. He was no longer the thing that consumed the forgotten. He was the thing that ensured they were remembered. And in that, he had found something he had not known he was missing. Meaning. Her POV. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest turned to shadow, Svanna walked to the hollow. She had been back many times. The symbols on the stone still glowed faintly when she touched them. The pool still reflected more than it should, but it no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a sanctuary. She knelt at the edge of the pool and gazed into the water. Her reflection stared back. Older now. Stronger. Still marked by what had been done to her, but no longer defined by it. Behind her, the shape appeared. She didn't turn. Do you ever wish you had stayed forgotten? She asked quietly. The shape was silent for a long moment. No. Svanna smiled faintly. Good. She stood and turned to face it. Thank you. For following me. For showing me I wasn't alone. The shape tilted its head. You were never alone. You simply could not see. Svanna nodded. I see now. Her POV continued. She returned to the settlement as night fell. The fires were lit. The clan was gathered. This time when she walked through the center, people nodded. Some smiled. A few even spoke her name. Not with pity. Not with fear. But with acknowledgement. She had become part of the clan again. not as the marked, but as the one who had refused to be erased, and in refusing, had forced them to see themselves clearly. Her POV, final years later, when Svana was old and her hair had gone gray, the children of the clan would ask her to tell them stories. She would sit by the fire and speak of the forest, of the names carved in stone, of the shape that walked among the trees, of the girl who had been sent away and came back, and every time, she would end the story the same way. The forest does not forgive, but it remembers, and as long as we remember with it, we will not repeat what was done. The children would nod solemnly, and Svana would glance toward the tree line, where the shape stood, still watching, still waiting, still there. The clans change, they forget, they remember, they err, they heal, but I remain, not as punishment, not as salvation, but as witness, to what was, to what is, to what will be. And as long as the forest breathes, I will walk its edges, a reminder that some things cannot be buried, some names cannot be erased, and some debts are paid not in blood, but in memory.